Hi, everyone. Ever find something leaving a bitter taste in your mouth? If you're dealing with a literal physiological bitter taste rather than a figurative expression, it could be a sign of acid reflux or dehydration or a dental infection or the side effects of certain medications. But those things, they don't usually leave a nostalgic, memorable association, right? Yet, in this week's Torah laning, that's precisely what Bnei Yisrael claim, isn't it? You see, in this week's Torah reading, after Bnei Yisrael leave Har Sinai like school children leaving school, trying to forget the experience, the people actually get nostalgic. Not for the Sinai experience, nor for the miracles that they had experienced together in the past year. No, the people get nostalgic for the food of slavery. The Torah tells us, we recall the fish that we ate in Mitzrayim freely. The cucumbers, the watermelons, the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. The people go on to complain that as a result of their freedom and their current experience, they no longer get to have fish and onions and garlic. Wow, what a loss. And when you see how they needed to suffer with the heavenly mun, which the Torah describes as tasting like a cake, either a honey one or deep fried or whatever you wanted, you really must ask just why the people cried over the smelly foods. Were they out of their minds? Rashi notes that there must have been something deeper bothering them. He notes that the expression bochim lemishpachosehem means that the people would rather gather in family groups out in the open to publicize their complaints to one another. It was a big family cry-in. Everyone sat on their stoop or sat on their doorstep and publicly complained about the food situation in the desert. Rashi further cites the teaching of the rabbis that the crying was al iske mishbechosehem concerning the families, namely that they complained about the arayos, the forbidden relationships that the Torah had just legislated for the Jewish nation. But my question to Rashi is obvious. How do Chazal know that? The Torah says they cried over fish and garlic and onions. Why can't fish mean fish and onions mean onions? And perhaps even stronger, why does the Torah tell us the superficial complaint if the real complaint was something else? And if the issue was that embittered them was arayos, say arayos. If the issue was spiritual resistance to Torah, then say that. Why tell us about the bitter taste from the loss of fish and garlic? You know, people often believe that Freud noted that sometimes a cigar is only a cigar. And that's true when people consider their own emotional reactions as well. Very often people sincerely believe the thing that they think they're upset about is indeed the thing that they're upset about. And it isn't. Think for a second. Normal people do not organize a national emotional breakdown over onions. Bnei Yisrael were at the very least normal people. And if they were so riled over old slave-oriented foods in the place of delicacy, then something deeper must have been happening. What Chazal highlight then is a fundamental insight into the human psyche. The people were not consciously planning rebellion. Many of them probably generally felt that their issue was the food. But the Torah had recently imposed obligations and restriction and discipline and boundaries. And life now demanded self-control. And that produced discomfort. But discomfort is really experienced as, I don't like being told no. Instead, it gets translated into, the food isn't good. The onion became a symbol. In short, say Chazal, the stated complaint became a vehicle for a deeper complaint. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zecher Tzadik Livracha notes that this is not the only time we find a similar psychological insight. Take next week's parsha, which, by the way, is being read in our beloved Eretz Yisrael this week, where Moshe sent the Meraglim, the spies, to gather intelligence about the land and the people of Canaan. When those spies returned, with the report that the other nations were stronger than we are, the Zohar HaKadosh, which is quoted by many of the Mefarshim as well, claimed that the spies had an agenda. They were afraid that when they go into the land of Israel, they would lose their positions of leadership and of honor within the nation. And so therefore they subconsciously sabotaged the plans to take the nation into Eretz Yisrael so that they wouldn't lose their grip on power. But again, how do Chazal know this? And in describing Lot's decision to settle in Sodom, following his breakup with Avram Avinu, a simple reading of the psukim there in Parashas Lech Lecha also would indicate that the decision was made on the very practical grounds that Lot was a shepherd and that the land surrounding Sodom was fertile and bountiful. Yet there too, Chazal attributes sinister motives to Lot. He specifically picked the area because of its reputation for lewdness and immorality. Why don't Chazal just take Lot's position and his statement at its face value? Rabbi Yaakov answers, Chazal do this because they descend to the depths of man's psyche. They are telling us something very profound about human nature. Everyone has subconscious feelings and forces and desires that perhaps even the person himself is not completely aware of. Something goes on inside a person that's more than meets the eye. Chazal, either through Ruach HaKodesh or through their sensitive intuition of how human beings function, know that something deeper is going on. Whether crying about fish and garlic, giving up one's position and leading the people astray, as by the previously well-respected Meraglim, or even the motivations of Lot, Chazal remind us that everyone, whether he realized it or not, needs to be aware of subconscious motivations that occur within him. A person must always introspect and check his motives. I know it's a sobering reality, and by the way, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Which, by the way, reminds me of the most bitter nostalgia of all. I refer, of course, to maror. You know, one of the strangest halachos of the Seder is that the preferred maror is chazeres, is romaine lettuce. Yet romaine lettuce is not particularly bitter. Why choose something that doesn't seem to embody bitterness as the ideal maror? Citing his grandfather, the Beis Halevi, Rav Soloveitchik connected this to tefillah. In davening in our Shmona Esrei, we say Re'eh v'anyenu. What exactly are we asking for in our Shmona Esrei? Do we ask Hashem to point out our suffering, see us in our suffering? Doesn't Hashem already know of our suffering? Of course he sees our suffering. But the deeper request is, Ribono Shel Olam, Almighty God, help us see our suffering correctly. Help us understand what our real challenges are. Help us identify our real afflictions. Help us distinguish between what merely feels painful and what is actually holding us back. And perhaps that's exactly why chazeres is the ideal maror. You see, at first it tastes mild, almost sweet, but only later does the bitterness start to emerge. Because some of life's greatest challenges do not initially appear bitter. The slavery in Mitzrayim itself didn't begin with whips. Chazal described a gradual process. At first, it seemed manageable. Only later did its bitterness become obvious. And likewise, many internal spiritual problems don't feel like problems. And many things we label as problems may actually be opportunities for growth. Likewise, the Jewish people believed their problem was food. They believed their suffering was the lack of onions. They were focused on what felt bitter. But Chazal tell us they completely misdiagnosed the situation. The real struggle was actually much deeper. The challenge was adapting to a life of Kedusha. The challenge was accepting limits. The challenge was spiritual responsibility. The garlic and the onions were merely the symptom, not the disease. People assume that intelligence is what protects us from self-deception. But the Torah suggests otherwise. That generation of the Midbar was not made up of simpletons. The Meraglim, the spies, were leaders. Lot lived and learned in Avram Avinu's home. And yet Chazal repeatedly reveal motivations that even these individuals may not have fully recognized within themselves. Why? Because intelligence does not merely help us discover truth. It can also help us defend our assumptions. A brilliant person can construct a brilliant explanation for pretty much anything. The question is not, can I justify what I'm doing? Most of us can justify what we do. The harder question is, would I see this the same way if I had absolutely nothing personally at stake? That's the question that the Misonanim, the complainers in this week's Parsha, never asked. They thought they were crying about onions. And Chazal tell us they were crying about something much deeper. And perhaps that is why the preferred maror is not obviously bitter. And perhaps that's why every day we say Re'ev Anyenu. Not because Hashem needs our help seeing our suffering, but because we need help seeing what we're suffering about. Perhaps that's the deep lesson of the onions and the maror. We often focus on what feels bitter, while missing what's actually shaping us. We explain our reactions, we defend our choices, we justify our complaints. And yet Chazal teach us that the visible issue is sometimes only the surface. So here's an easy practice for this week. When something leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, pause and ask yourself one question. Just what exactly is my onion? What am I upset about on the surface? What deeper concern, what deeper fear, what deeper ego, what deeper punishment or challenge might be hiding underneath? What am I upset about on the surface? And what deeper concern do I have underneath? That question will not solve every problem, but it can help us move from reaction to reflection, from symptom to cause, and from self-justification to self-understanding. Because the first step towards growth is not merely dealing with the bitterness that we feel, it's recognizing what truly caused it, and ultimately recognizing what we might be able to do and what we might be able to do something about it. Wishing you and yours success in that journey, and you and yours a Shabbat Shalom to all.